She threw me on the street the day after my son's funeral, claiming the house was hers now. At the will reading, she laughed. "Hope you enjoy being homeless, Eleanor." Then the lawyer opened the sealed envelope. "If you're watching this, hit subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to like the video if you enjoy stories where karma catches up." Let me rewind and show you how this nightmare began. Because sometimes revenge doesn't require a plan. It's enough to let people reveal their true selves. The phone rang at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. David's voice came through in a gasp. "Mom, my chest. I can't." And then silence. By the time I arrived at the hospital, my 45-year-old son was already gone. The doctor's tone was detached as he explained, "A sudden, massive heart attack. Nothing they could have done." Stephanie stood beside me in the bright hospital corridor, her face composed in shock. But for a brief moment, I thought I saw something else flicker across her features. Relief. No, I told myself. Surely that was grief twisting my perception. "What do we do now?" I whispered, numb. Stephanie straightened her shoulders, her voice cold. "Now we face reality. David's gone, Eleanor, and I have decisions to make." A chill spread through me. We'd never been close, but David had always been the bridge between us. Now that bridge was gone, and I was only just beginning to sense the depth of her hostility. "Of course, dear. We'll get through this together," I murmured, reaching for her hand. She withdrew it. "We'll see about that." Her words should have been a warning. Instead, I excused her behavior, convincing myself she was simply grieving in her own way. The next 3 days were consumed by funeral planning. I offered to cover the expenses, but Stephanie insisted on handling everything herself. "I'm his wife," she repeated firmly. "I know what he'd want." I focused on writing David's eulogy, calling friends and relatives, and holding myself together. I'd buried my parents and my husband before, but losing a child was its own kind of torment. The night before the service, I sat in David's childhood bedroom, now the room he had shared with Stephanie. The walls were lined with pictures: his graduation, their wedding, last Christmas with his nephew, but none of them featured me. I realized, with a twist of pain, that Stephanie had deliberately removed every photo of David and me together. A soft knock broke my thoughts. Stephanie leaned against the doorframe, her eyes hard. "We need to talk, Eleanor." The funeral itself was beautifully arranged, the flowers, the music, everything perfect. But watching Stephanie perform as the grieving widow while slipping in hints about moving forward felt like a performance. As I stood in the receiving line, thanking guests for their condolences, I overheard Stephanie whispering to her sister behind a display of lilies. "The life insurance will cover the mortgage for 2 years," she said, "and without the extra expenses." "What about Eleanor? Where will she go?" her sister asked. Stephanie's laugh was bitter. "Not my problem. She's an adult. She can figure it out." My stomach turned to ice. For 2 years, I'd been living in their home, ever since I sold my own house to help them with their down payment. David had assured me it was temporary, just until I found a smaller place. But somehow, temporary had stretched into permanent, and I'd settled into a routine of cooking, cleaning, and being useful. Apparently, I'd been naive. "Eleanor." Stephanie appeared at my side, her public smile still perfectly in place. "Can you help me in the kitchen? There are some things we should discuss." I followed her through the clusters of mourners, exchanging polite nods and accepting a final hug from my sister, who was flying back to Phoenix in the morning. In the kitchen, Stephanie closed the door softly, then turned to me with a cool, composed expression. "I'm going to be blunt," she said, her voice calm but businesslike. "This house was in David's name, which means it's mine now. I need space to grieve without complications." "Complications?" I repeated, keeping my voice steady even as my chest tightened. "You living here," she said evenly. "It's not working anymore, Eleanor. I need privacy." Her words landed like a punch to the gut. "Stephanie, I know you're grieving, but surely we can—" "No." She raised a hand, silencing me. "I've made my decision. You have until tomorrow evening to pack. That should be enough time." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the young woman who'd once hugged me at Christmas, who'd cried with joy when David proposed, who had called me Mom. That woman was gone, replaced with someone cold, deliberate, and unyielding. "And where do you expect me to go?" I asked quietly. Stephanie shrugged. "You're an adult, Eleanor. You'll figure it out." The casual cruelty of her words stole my breath. David would have been horrified. "David's dead," she said, her tone flat, final. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us." The next day, I packed my life into 4 suitcases and 2 boxes. 67 years, distilled into what could fit in my trunk. As I folded clothes and wrapped the few framed photos I'd been allowed to keep, I kept expecting Stephanie to appear, to apologize, to say she'd spoken out of grief, to tell me, of course, I could stay until I had somewhere else to go. But she never came. Instead, at precisely 6:00 p.m., she appeared in my doorway, arms crossed. "Time's up, Eleanor." I zipped the final suitcase and looked around the room that had been my sanctuary for the past 2 years. It was stripped bare now, cold and impersonal. A guest room again, if it had ever been anything else. "I'll need a few more minutes to load everything into the car," I said. "I'll help you." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Stephanie wanted me out, and she intended to see it through quickly. We made 3 silent trips to the car. On the last one, as I set the final box in the trunk, I turned to her. Maybe it was an instinct to appeal to whatever scrap of humanity she had left. "I don't know why you're angry with me," I said softly. "I wish I knew what I'd done so I could make it right." Stephanie's face didn't soften. "You didn't do anything wrong, Eleanor. You just exist. In my house. In my life. In my way. David pitied you, but I don't." Her brutal honesty, while painful, was almost easier than the polite facade we'd been maintaining. "I see," I murmured, sliding into the driver's seat and lowering the window. "Will you at least let me know if there's a formal reading of David's will? I assume he left something." Stephanie's brow furrowed, her voice genuinely confused. "Why would he leave you anything? You weren't his wife. You didn't contribute financially to this household." The bitter irony made me smile faintly. The $40,000 I'd given them for the down payment might disagree with her assessment, but clearly Stephanie had convinced herself it was a gift, or had chosen to forget. "Of course," I said, my tone flat. Silly of me to assume. I drove away without glancing back, heading for the Hampton Inn off Route 9. It was the cheapest hotel I could find, and I needed somewhere to breathe while I figured out my next step. In the rearview mirror, I saw Stephanie standing in the driveway, her arms crossed, watching until my car disappeared around the bend. The hotel lobby smelled of industrial cleaners and faint despair. I checked in for a week, then hauled my luggage to a small, impersonal room. It reeked of overused air freshener and broken dreams. I dropped onto the stiff bedspread and stared at the stranger in the mirror above the dresser. The woman looking back at me wasn't just a widow anymore. She was now childless, homeless, and apparently worthless in the eyes of the only family she had left. But as I sat in that sterile, soulless hotel room, a strange feeling began to stir in my chest. It wasn't despair, though plenty of that lingered like a shadow. No, this was sharper. Something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. Stephanie thought she'd won. She thought she'd discarded her inconvenient mother-in-law and secured her prize without consequence. What she didn't know was that my son had been far more thoughtful and far more loyal than she'd ever realized. 2 weeks into my hotel stay, just as I was beginning to panic over how quickly my savings were disappearing, the phone rang. "Mrs. Fairfield, this is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I handled your son's legal affairs." "Yes, Mr. Morrison," I said, immediately recognizing his name. "We met at David and Stephanie's house closing." I'm calling to inform you that the probate process has been completed. There will be a formal reading of David's will next Tuesday at 2 p.m. in my office. Your presence is required." Required? I sat up straighter, the old mattress creaking in protest. "I think there may be a mistake," I started cautiously. "Stephanie was under the impression—" "Mrs. Fairfield," Mr. Morrison interrupted gently, "I can only follow David's instructions, and his will clearly names you as a beneficiary. I'll see you Tuesday at 2. When he hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment, my pulse quickening. David had left me something, maybe just a keepsake, his father's watch or a box of family photographs. Whatever it was, Stephanie would have to accept his decision. That weekend, I distracted myself by scouring apartment listings, modest one-bedroom rentals, senior living communities, anything I could realistically afford. My dwindling bank balance could stretch to cover one more week at the hotel, plus a deposit and first month's rent. After that, I'd be relying solely on Social Security and the modest pension from my years of teaching. At 1:45 p.m. the following Tuesday, I sat in the parking lot of Morrison & Associates, watching Stephanie pull up in a gleaming silver BMW. She was dressed in a black designer dress that likely cost more than I spent in a month. A man in an equally expensive suit stepped out of the passenger side, phone glued to his hand. When I walked into the lobby, Stephanie's polished mask cracked, her eyes narrowed. "What is she doing here?" she hissed at the receptionist. "Mrs. Fairfield is here for the will reading," the receptionist replied evenly. "Which Mrs. Fairfield?" Stephanie's voice sharpened. "Both of you, apparently," the young woman said, unruffled. The man, whom I now recognized as Stephanie's brother Marcus, leaned in to whisper something in her ear. Stephanie's jaw tightened, and she gave a curt nod before sitting stiffly across the waiting area, making it abundantly clear that whatever threadbare civility had existed between us was gone. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Mr. Morrison appeared and ushered us into his office. He was a kind-eyed man in his 60s, his silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses lending him the air of someone who still believed in fairness and loyalty. "Ladies, gentlemen," he said, settling behind a polished mahogany desk. "I know this is a difficult time, but David was very clear about his wishes. I'll read his will in full and afterward we'll address any questions." Stephanie leaned forward eagerly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Marcus had a legal pad out, ready to take notes. I folded my hands and waited in silence. The first half of the will was no surprise. Stephanie was left the house, the cars, the retirement accounts, and the life insurance payout. She nodded with approval at every mention, occasionally glancing at me with smug satisfaction. Then Mr. Morrison's tone shifted slightly, and I felt my heart pick up its pace. There is, however, one final clause David added just 3 months ago. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Stephanie's confident smile vanished as she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Marcus set his pen down, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat and read aloud. "To my mother, Eleanor Fairfield, who generously provided the down payment for our home and never once asked for repayment, I leave the contents of Safety Deposit Box E3 through D7 at First National Bank, along with all accompanying documents and account information enclosed within." "What safety deposit box?" Stephanie's voice was sharp, accusatory. "David never mentioned a safety deposit box." Mr. Morrison looked up, calm but firm. "Apparently, it was something he managed privately. He was very clear that its contents belong solely to his mother." I was just as surprised as Stephanie. David had never told me about a safety deposit box either. What could he possibly have left for me? "What's in it?" Marcus asked, leaning forward, his instincts as a lawyer kicking in. "I have no idea," Mr. Morrison replied evenly. David only provided the bank's details and instructions stating Mrs. Fairfield would have full access upon his passing. Stephanie's cheeks flushed with anger. "This is absurd. If there's anything valuable in that box, it should be part of the estate. We'll contest this." "You're welcome to try," Mr. Morrison said with a trace of patience. But the language is very clear, and David was completely of sound mind when he made this change. I personally witnessed him sign it. When exactly was this added? I asked quietly. Mr. Morrison checked his notes. February 15th. I blinked, remembering the date instantly. The day after Valentine's Day. We'd had dinner together that evening, and David had been unusually quiet while Stephanie complained about the neighbor's barking dog. He'd barely spoken a word the entire night. "This is a waste of time," Stephanie snapped, standing abruptly. "Marcus, let's go. We'll file a challenge tomorrow." "Actually," Mr. Morrison said, sliding another envelope across his desk, "there's one more thing." David left explicit instructions for his mother regarding the box. "Mrs. Fairfield, he wanted you to access it within a few days after completing the paperwork." I took the envelope carefully. "What's this?" "Bank authorization forms, along with his personal key," he explained. "Once the bank verifies the death certificate, you'll be able to open it. It typically takes about 3 business days." Stephanie's eyes locked onto the envelope in my hands like a predator sizing up prey. "I'm coming with you." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Mr. Morrison interjected. "Bank policy strictly limits access to Mrs. Eleanor Fairfield only." "This is insane," Stephanie spat. "How do we even know there's anything worth having in there? It could be empty or just sentimental junk." I rose from my seat, clutching the envelope. "I suppose we'll see next week." As we left the office, I could feel Stephanie's glare drilling into my back. In the parking lot, she intercepted me by my car. "Eleanor, let's be reasonable," she said smoothly. "Whatever's in that box, we should share it. David would have wanted me to benefit from what he left behind." For the first time since David's passing, I almost smiled. "That's funny, considering you made it quite clear you thought he wouldn't leave me anything. Now you're suddenly interested in sharing." "I'm just saying—" "No," I cut her off. "You're saying whatever you think will get you access to something that isn't yours." I unlocked my car door. David was very specific. "The contents are mine." Her polished mask dropped completely, revealing something far colder beneath. "Don't forget, Eleanor," she hissed. "You're homeless. You need my goodwill more than I need yours." I froze, my hand resting on the car door. "Actually, Stephanie," I said quietly, "I don't think I need anything from you at all." 3 business days later, after presenting David's death certificate and completing all the bank's formalities, I finally stood in front of Safety Deposit Box 3537 at First National Bank. Mrs. Peterson, the branch manager, greeted me warmly and offered her condolences. She personally escorted me through 2 layers of security doors. "Box 3537 is one of our larger units," she explained. "Your son rented it about 5 years ago and came in regularly." 5 years? My son had been planning something quietly for half a decade. She inserted the master key while I turned David's. The drawer slid out smoothly. It was about the size of a briefcase, surprisingly heavy. "Take your time," Mrs. Peterson said softly, leading me to a private viewing room. "I'll be at my desk if you need anything." Inside the small, silent room, I lifted the lid. On top was a letter in David's handwriting, addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. "Mom," it read, "if you're seeing this, I'm gone, and I'm sure Stephanie has already shown you who she really is. I'm sorry, but I'm not shocked. I've known for years what kind of person I married, and I've been preparing for this moment." I swallowed hard and kept reading. "You gave us $40,000 for the down payment. I know you thought of it as a loan even though you never asked for repayment. I invested that money 5 years ago and kept adding to it. What's in these accounts isn't just repayment. It's what those investments have grown into." Underneath the letter were documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, account credentials. My eyes widened at the numbers. $185,000 spread across several accounts, all in my name. I picked up the letter again, tears stinging my eyes. "Stephanie claims you contribute nothing. What she doesn't say is that I've been covering the mortgage completely from my salary all these years. Everything you gave us went straight into these investments. I also documented everything, Mom. Emails, texts, every offhand comment she made about you. It's all in the folder marked Documentation. You deserve to know. I opened the folder, my vision blurring. Printed emails, screenshots, photos of statements, all proof of Stephanie's manipulation. The last paragraph broke me. You deserve better than this treatment. Take this money and build a life where no one makes you feel unwelcome. And, Mom, don't tell Stephanie about any of this until you're safely away from her. Trust me. Love, David. I sat in that room for nearly an hour, absorbing everything he left behind. When I emerged, I knew exactly how deeply Stephanie had deceived us both. Mrs. Peterson helped me gather the documents into a large envelope and walked me through the process of transferring the accounts. As I reached my car, my phone rang. "Eleanor," Stephanie said, her tone sickly sweet. "Why don't you come over for lunch today? We can talk about what you found in the safety deposit box." I smiled faintly at my reflection in the car window. "That's generous, Stephanie. I'll be there at noon." It was time for Stephanie to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who surprise you most. I arrived at Stephanie's house, or rather her house now, at exactly noon, carrying a small gift bag and wearing my calmest poker face. Stephanie opened the door dressed in a flowing white dress that likely cost more than my weekly hotel bill. She greeted me with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you came. I made your favorite chicken salad." How thoughtful, I mused silently. Suddenly she remembered my favorite foods now that she wanted something from me. The dining table was laid out with her fine wedding china and a centerpiece of fresh flowers. She'd clearly put a lot of effort into the show. She poured iced tea, chatting lightly about the weather as if this were just another lunch between family. I let her talk, quietly waiting for her to get to the point. "So," she said at last, settling gracefully into her chair, "I've been thinking about yesterday, about the safety deposit box." "Have you?" I asked mildly, sipping my tea. "I know we've had our differences, but David would want us to support each other right now. Family should stick together." Family. The word rang hollow coming from the woman who had thrown me out the day after burying my son. "I couldn't agree more," I replied evenly. Stephanie's eyes lit up, mistaking my composure for agreement. "I'm glad you feel that way. I worried you might be upset about finding your own place so soon, but I really needed space to grieve." "Of course," I said calmly, taking a bite of chicken salad. "Grief affects people differently." "Exactly." She leaned forward, finally circling to her real goal. "So, about what David left you, I thought maybe we could combine our resources. We could take whatever was in that box and pool it with his life insurance. I've got some excellent financial advisors." "I'll bet you do," I said lightly, imagining those advisors encouraging her lavish spending habits. "That's very thoughtful, Stephanie. But tell me, why are you so sure there was anything of value in that box?" The question caught her off guard. "Well, David was always so private about finances. He must have had a reason to keep something separate." "Private?" I repeated, my voice calm but sharp. "That's an interesting word." "You know what I mean." She waved a hand dismissively. "Men and their financial planning, they never tell us everything." I set my fork down and met her gaze. "Actually, Stephanie, I think David told you exactly as much as he thought you needed to know." A flicker crossed her face. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. "What did you find in that box, Eleanor?" The moment of truth was close, but I wasn't ready to show my entire hand. Instead, I reached for the gift bag I'd brought. "I brought you something," I said, handing her a small wrapped package. She unwrapped it eagerly, revealing a framed photo of David at his college graduation. For a moment, her face softened. "Oh, Eleanor, this is lovely. Thank you." "I thought you should have it. After all, you were such a devoted wife." The weight I placed on the word wasn't lost on her. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing as she searched my face. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all, I said lightly. Just acknowledging how well you looked after my son. Stephanie carefully set the photo aside, her mask slipping. The sweetness drained away, replaced by a tired, guarded expression. Eleanor, you're being cryptic. Just tell me what was in the safety deposit box. I smiled and took another sip of tea. Documents, mostly. Fascinating ones. What kind of documents? Oh, financial statements, investment records, and some correspondence. I paused deliberately. Quite a few printed emails and text messages. The color drained from her face. Text messages? David was thorough, I said evenly, pulling out my phone. Especially in his last few months. I opened a gallery of photos, screenshots David had taken of her conversations. Would you like to see one? This is from about 6 months ago. I turned the phone toward her, showing a screenshot of a message she'd sent to her sister. God, I can't wait until that old bat finally moves out. Then we can turn her room into the home gym I've always wanted. Stephanie lunged across the table for my phone, but I smoothly pulled it back, keeping my expression calm. There are dozens more, I said conversationally. David was meticulous with his documentation. This next one is particularly enlightening. It's you texting Marcus about how you convinced David I should be paying my share of household expenses when the mortgage was already coming straight out of his salary. Stop, Stephanie whispered, her voice trembling. And here's an email, I continued, scrolling casually, where you and your sister laugh about how gullible I am, how easy it's been to make me feel like a burden when you were already planning to kick me out after David's death. I placed the phone on the table and leaned back, studying her with feigned curiosity. That was forward-thinking of you. By the way, planning my eviction while David was still alive. Stephanie's polished composure finally shattered. He had no right to save private messages. Actually, I replied smoothly, he had every right. It was his house, and you were talking about his mother. I folded my hands, my tone calm but sharp. The real question is, Stephanie, what are we going to do about this situation? Her voice was low, stripped of pretense now. What do you want? I tilted my head. Want? I don't want anything from you. I never did. Then why are you doing this? She asked, her voice cracking. What's the point of humiliating me? I considered her question for a moment. You know, you're right. There's no point in humiliating you. I leaned forward. You've done that perfectly well yourself. I don't understand. You threw me out of my home the day after my son's funeral. You called me worthless, claimed David only pitied me, told me I'd contributed nothing to this household. I stood slowly, my voice steady but cutting. But here's what you never realized about David. He saw everything. Every cruel word, every lie, every little manipulation. Stephanie gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. And you want to know the really beautiful part? I said, my tone softening like a blade sliding from its sheath. He didn't keep all this evidence to hurt you. He did it to protect me. Because he knew that when he was gone, you'd finally show your true colors. You can't prove any of this would hold up in court, she spat, though her voice trembled. Court? I laughed, a sharp, unexpected sound that made her flinch. Oh, Stephanie, sweetheart, I'm not taking you to court. Her confusion was genuine. You're not? Why would I? I shrugged. You've already given me everything I need. I don't understand, she whispered. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, setting it between us. David left me far more than screenshots, Stephanie. He left 5 years' worth of proof showing exactly how you manipulated both of us. She stared at the folder like it might bite. Bank statements showing the mortgage was paid entirely from David's salary while I lived here, I listed calmly. Email chains between you and Marcus, strategizing over the Eleanor situation, Credit card bills proving you splurged on luxury purchases the same days you told David we couldn't afford basic groceries. Stephanie's breathing quickened, her face paling. David saved all of it, I continued, my voice soft but deadly. Every message, every receipt, every joke you made about him being a pushover. He kept copies of the emails where you called him weak and mocked how easy it was to convince him I was a financial burden. She flinched at that, as if I'd struck her. You know what I found most interesting? I said, opening the folder and flipping through neatly organized pages. This email thread, the one where you and Marcus discuss having me declared incompetent so you could access my pension and Social Security. That's not... We never actually... No, you didn't, I said calmly. And do you know why? Because David figured out what you were planning and made sure you'd never pull it off. Stephanie's eyes widened. What? What steps? You don't have anything worth protecting. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Don't I? That's funny, because according to these investment statements, I seem to have quite a bit worth protecting. Money? David quietly grew over the past 5 years. That's impossible, she hissed, her voice shaking. You're living in a hotel. I'm staying there because I chose to, I said evenly, while I decide my next steps, not because I can't afford something better. The silence between us thickened. I could practically hear Stephanie's thoughts racing as she tried to calculate the numbers. How much? She finally asked. Excuse me? How much money did David leave you? I calmly closed the folder and stood. That's really none of your business, is it? I'm his wife, she shot back. I have a right to know. You had the right to know what he left you, I said coolly, which, as I recall, was generous. The house, the cars, the life insurance, his retirement accounts. I'd say you've done quite well, Stephanie. She shot up from her chair so quickly it screeched against the floor. You manipulative old witch! You're trying to steal what's mine! Steal? I raised a brow. How would I be stealing anything? Everything I have was given to me by my son, who had every legal right to decide where his assets went. He was my husband. Yes, I said sharply, and apparently he knew exactly what kind of wife you were. The words lingered in the air like a dagger. Stephanie's face flushed with a mix of fury and something that looked a lot like fear. I want to see those bank statements, she demanded. I'm sure you do, I replied. I'm warning you. I let out a laugh, sharp, unexpected, and freeing. Stephanie, sweetheart, you threw me out of your house. You humiliated me at my son's funeral. You made sure I knew you thought I was worthless. What exactly do you think you can threaten me with now? She stared at me, her expression shifting as she recalibrated. The threats had failed, so she tried a softer approach. Eleanor, please, she said, voice softening. Let's be reasonable. I know I've been difficult since David passed. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking straight. But we're family. We should work together. Family, I repeated slowly. Yes, I remember you mentioning that. Right after you told me David pitied me and that I'd contributed nothing here. I didn't mean that, she insisted. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. Oh, but you did mean them, I said calmly. And that's why David's records are so valuable. Because he kept proof. Proof that you said these things over and over again to different people, for years. Stephanie's mask slipped again. What do you want from me, Eleanor? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry I asked you to leave. I'm sorry for everything. Now can we please discuss this money like adults? There's nothing to discuss. Of course there is, she snapped. If David left you that kind of money, we should plan how to manage it responsibly. I know excellent financial advisors. You mean you could help me spend it responsibly? That's not what I said. It's what you meant. I grabbed my purse and straightened. Stephanie, let me be perfectly clear. This isn't some inheritance that just fell into my lap. This is the return on the $40,000 I gave you for your down payment. plus 5 years of careful investing. Her jaw dropped. $40,000? Yes. Did you think it was a gift? Did you honestly think I handed over my life savings out of sheer generosity, with no expectation of repayment? David said it was a family contribution. David was being gracious, trying to spare both of us embarrassment, I said, my voice like ice. But he never forgot it was a loan. I could see her mind racing now, panic starting to bloom. If you invested $40,000 5 years ago, how much is it worth now? She whispered. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app Mrs. Peterson had helped me set up, and turned the screen toward her. $185,000, I said simply. Stephanie's face drained of color. She gripped the table for balance. That's impossible. David was a careful investor, I said softly, and apparently he was very motivated to make sure his mother was cared for. Her voice trembled. But that's almost as much as the life insurance policy. Yes, I said calmly. It is, and that money isn't part of the estate. It's mine. It should be split between us, she snapped. Based on what legal principle? Based on the fact that I'm his wife, Stephanie hissed, and you're just his mother. Those words, just his mother, hit me like a slap, but instead of pain, I felt a strange clarity. You're right, I said softly. I am just his mother, the woman who gave birth to him, raised him, supported him through college, and lent him the money for this house. The same house where you tossed me out like trash the day after his funeral. I stood, slipping my purse over my shoulder. Apparently, that was enough for David to make sure I'd never have to depend on anyone's charity again. Wait! Stephanie called desperately as I walked toward the door. Eleanor, wait! We can work this out. Please, sit down. Let's be rational. I paused in the doorway and turned back. What exactly do you think we need to work out? The money, our relationship, everything. Her words tumbled out quickly, panic sharpening her voice. I know I made mistakes. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. But we're family. We can fix this. I studied her carefully. I'm sure you were worried about money, I said evenly, but not for the reasons you claim. Her face tightened. What's that supposed to mean? I reached into my bag and pulled out the final document from David's folder, the one I'd saved for last. I laid it gently on the table. It means David also kept meticulous records of your spending, I said, including the $15,000 you racked up on credit cards in the month before he died. Stephanie's face turned gray. Spa packages, designer dresses, a weekend in New York with your sister, all while you cried to David about not having money for groceries. I wasn't, she stammered. You weren't what? Planning to live comfortably off his life insurance while pushing out the inconvenient mother-in-law who might ruin your plans? Stephanie slumped back into her chair, all pretense gone. You don't understand, she whispered. The pressure I was under, everyone expected me to be perfect. Perfect wife, perfect hostess. David's colleagues, the neighbors, my family. I had to maintain appearances. Do you know how exhausting that is? I looked around her elegant dining room, her designer dress, the curated perfection of her life. My lips curled in bitter amusement. No, Stephanie, I said quietly. I wouldn't know. I was too busy actually taking care of your husband while you were busy spending his money. I loved David, she snapped through tears, her perfect makeup streaking down her face. You loved what David gave you, I corrected. There's a difference. Her sobs filled the room. I can't lose everything. I can't go back to being nobody. You're not nobody, I said, my voice firm but calm. You're David's widow. You've inherited a $500,000 home, a $200,000 life insurance policy, and his retirement accounts. You'll live comfortably if you manage it wisely. But it's not enough for the life I planned, she whispered. Then maybe, I said softly. You planned the wrong life. I turned to leave, and this time she didn't try to stop me. Instead, a soft sound made me pause. I turned back to see Stephanie slumped forward, her face pale, her breath shallow. Not a heart attack, just the heavy, suffocating weight of defeat. The look of someone who'd finally realized they'd lost everything they thought they were entitled to, and no charm, no manipulation, no cruelty could bring it back. I can't, she murmured. I can't lose everything. You're not losing everything, Stephanie, I said gently. You're losing what was never yours to begin with. I left her there, in her lavish dining room with her wedding china and crumbling facade of control, and stepped out into the sunlight of my new beginning. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's justice, served quietly, precisely, at the perfect moment. And if you're lucky, it comes with a healthy bank account and the unshakable knowledge that your child grew up to be exactly the kind, thoughtful man you raised him to be. David had taken care of me, just as he always promised he would. Even from beyond the grave, my son had kept his word. That was worth more than any amount of money. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Your voice matters.